All right, it's chapter 9 time. So in chapter 9, we generally have a return to normalcy. And it's a pretty light chapter in terms of tension. There are little intricacies in conversation that we should be picking up on. But there wasn't a lot of this kind of these tortured ideas that the narrator has. It was almost like she was starting to get a little comfortable at Manderley. And I think that this is important. We can't just have all of this tension all the time. We want to let some of these ideas build. And I think chapter 9 was a good way for us to meet some of the new characters, to try to bring us back into the realism of Manderley. It is a very real place. It doesn't have to be gothic and scary all of the time, because it really isn't. It's the ideas that the narrator associates with Manderley. It's the way people perceive Manderley, but really it's a beautiful, nice place by the sea. So chapter 9 begins. We do see a little bit of awkwardness at the beginning of the chapter. We know that Beatrice and her husband Giles are coming to visit, and the narrator just runs away when they come up to the house. She freaks out and runs away. We also see that Gothic convention of the labyrinth building, that her running through the hallways and her ending up in the West Wing, which is it kind of feels like that area of the house is off limits. And there was a small exchange with Danvers there, where it kind of felt like the narrator was treated like a child, and she was somewhere where she wasn't supposed to be, and Danvers kind of questioned her, and it felt as if the narrator felt like she was in trouble for being on the other side of the house, which I think really helped to build that theme of the stranger in the house that we saw in the chapter before. But eventually she does finally meet Beatrice, who I think Beatrice is a very, very important person that she should try to connect with. This is her husband's sister, right? And technically it's her sister now as well. They are now sisters-in-law. This could be somebody that the narrator could befriend, could be somebody that she could lean on. And I think that the building of that relationship is really important. But the problem is our narrator is just so awkward and inside of herself that we don't see that relationship really building. And as we meet Beatrice, we see this character being developed as somebody who's very blunt, who speaks her mind, who doesn't really hold back. And if you ask her the right questions, she will answer them. And as a reader, as I'm reading this, I'm seeing her as a key to information. If the narrator wants to know what happened to Rebecca, she could probably find out from Beatrice if she would only ask her. But we are seeing that this crippling anxiety that the narrator has is kind of holding her back from asking those questions, from realizing that Beatrice could potentially be a confidant character in this book. But the question is, will the narrator confide in her? Beatrice is also, she's blunt to the point where it could be a little damaging to our narrator's psyche. She'll say how she feels, but she also holds back from being completely direct. So she keeps saying things like, oh, like, you're not what I thought you would be. And the narrator never knows if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And it's so funny to understand who our narrator is, and to just see all of the people that she's surrounding herself with probably making it worse for the narrator. She's not surrounding herself with people that are going to make her feel better about herself. And I just think that's a really great touch by Du Maurier when she builds her other characters. She makes it so none of them really fit in with the narrator. A lot of this was conversations, so just picking up things about body language, who's looking at who is important, the looks that they're giving each other. I thought that her calling Maxim old all the time was a very interesting juxtaposition because Maxim always calls the narrator young. And we see that Maxim gets very, very offended when she calls him old or unfit. And yet Maxim still calls the narrator young, and you would think that he would probably not like these things and not do them to the narrator, but he still does them to the narrator. I thought that was just an interesting aside there. So we did get to see Manderley in its glory. We saw it as the nice place that maybe the narrator was referring back to at the beginning of the book. It was a beautiful day. They were sitting out in the lawn. There was a moment where the narrator was really content and comfortable and at peace, and she was laying on Maxim's shoulder, and he was petting her, weirdly like a dog. But she loved that moment, and she wondered if Max felt that the same thing, and she knew that he probably wasn't thinking anything of it, but for the narrator that was an important moment for her to kind of feel at home. And in terms of the conversation between Beatrice and the narrator, I think was the most important part of the chapter. There were some things that were revealed. I think in terms of character development, we learned that Beatrice, she can hold the key to knowledge. We also learned that she's pretty perceptive about people. And I think as readers, we can kind of trust what she says about other characters. That was evidenced by the fact that she, when she mentioned Crawley, she's like, oh, the boys are coming back and Crawley's going to have to leave. And that's exactly what happened. This is kind of quite opposite to what the narrator does when she makes predictions, right? So Beatrice's sense of others is very perceptive, and I think as readers, we can, when she says something about a character, I think that we've seen enough to kind of trust what she's saying about those characters, if in the future she's willing to give us more information. She was very critical of the appearance of the narrator. She didn't like the narrator's hair and was like, oh, you should fix it. Then she fixed it. She's like, oh, that's even worse. Again, kind of fueling the narrator's inferiority. But yeah, she is very critical of the narrator's appearance. This could maybe highlight that Rebecca was super beautiful. We're not exactly sure at this point why she is so critical of her. Maybe it's just her honesty, that she's willing to speak the truth, which could play a role later on. And then lastly, at the end of the chapter, we learned a little more about Beatrice. We learned that she hasn't been to Manderley in a while. It's been a couple of years since she's been to Manderley. That raises some questions with me. Why hasn't she been there? Was she in conflict with somebody there? Did something happen? We also learned that Beatrice, what else? At the end of the chapter, she repeated, "You're not what I expected," and she ended that with, "You're very different from Rebecca." So of course we had at the end of the chapter that line or that sentence that really sticks with us, and keeps building that theme of jealousy, of inferiority, and who knows? Maybe it could be a really good thing that she's different from Rebecca. We don't know yet, but we know how the narrator feels about it when Beatrice says that. And that's what matters, is we are getting the story from the narrator. We care about how the narrator is reacting to these things. And I think that this is something that is going to dig at the narrator and only make things worse. So that's chapter 9. We've got one more chapter after this, and I will see you for chapter 10. See ya.